Welcome to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio, bringing you insights and strategies to help you create a magnificent and fulfilling second half of life. Here's your host, certified professional retirement coach and best-selling author, Dr. Dorian Mintzer.
I want to welcome everybody to today's program. The topic of the program today is going to be Your Retirement Quest, 10 Secrets for Creating a Fulfilling Retirement. I'm Dorian Mintzer, owner of Revolutionize Retirement. Our speakers are co-authors Alan Spector and Keith Lawrence, and their book is called Your Retirement Quest, 10 Secrets for Creating and Living a Fulfilling Retirement. As they have both said, baby boomers look forward to retirement with a healthy dose of both excitement and anxiety. They tend to be unprepared for the realities of retirement. Neither do they anticipate the challenges, nor have they planned sufficiently to take full advantage of the opportunities. In addition, many boomers have perceptions of retirement that are, in essence, myths. Your Retirement Quest helps prospective and current retirees understand and address the challenges, recognize and debunk the myths, and set the stage for developing a holistic life plan that increases the odds of a fulfilling retirement. In this program, you'll discover challenges of retirement, myths about retirement, and 10 key elements to a fulfilling retirement, and I'm sure plenty more. So let me tell you a little about our guests. I'm going to tell you both about Alan and Keith. Alan Spector retired from a 33-year career with Procter Gamble Company in 2002. He was director of worldwide quality assurance, and he began, quote, practicing retirement, unquote, 5 years before that. In retirement, he's pursued two of the passions of his youth, baseball and books. He retired from playing baseball at age 65, but still coaches his grandson's team. He's written and published 4 books, including Your Retirement Quest, as well as numerous magazines and newspaper articles, and he's working on his first novel. He also does strategic planning and quality assurance consulting for companies and nonprofits, works out daily, is an avid crossword puzzle solver, writes a weekly featured classmate article for his high school class, leads a mentoring program at the high school from which he graduated, has sat on several boards, and is proud to be a founding partner of Lifescape Solutions. He and his wife, Ann, moved home to St. Louis in mid-2009. They had been away from their hometown for more than 40 years. They moved to be close to family, including 2 grandsons, longtime friends. They travel extensively to visit other family members, including 2 grandchildren in Boston, and to sightsee. And I wanted to just mention I had the pleasure of meeting Al and Ann this summer on one of their trips to Boston. So I actually had the chance to meet them in person, which is nice. Keith Lawrence has been preparing for over a decade for his retirement from Procter Gamble, which occurred in December 2009. He's a student of peak performance, seeking to learn how individuals, teams, and organizations achieve and sustain success throughout life. As Director of Human Resources at Procter Gamble, he worked with people from around the world, including partnering with other companies such as Toyota, IBM, GE, Staples, Wright Management, Accenture, Kellogg's, Whirlpool, and the RBL Group. He's published several articles, spoken at numerous forums, and is a member of several boards and advisory councils. He's founding partner of Lifescape Solutions, which is one of his many new pursuits, and was the catalyst for the book Your Retirement Quest. He's one of the select retirement coaches certified by Retirement Options, a national certifying body. With his wife, Sue, and their children, he's enjoying the flexibility to pursue his life purpose of, quote, unleashing dreams, unquote, spending time with friends and family, traveling more, embracing his many passions, maintaining his well-being, and giving back to others to make the world a better place. So I know we're in for a treat today, having both Alan and Keith with us. And I want to start with a question to them, really about their work. I know that you both engage people in your workshops and in your book by making them aware of the challenges of retirement. Can you share what some of those challenges are?
Dory, this is Keith. I'll start. And again, it's a great honor to be with you and the group here today. I've had a chance to listen on several of these calls, and I know what incredible experience and mastery there is of folks listening in. Hopefully, we'll be able to share a couple new insights with the group about our work over the last decade. Our challenge began basically while we were still both working at P&G. It was surprising to us that virtually without exception, after people retired, we had worked with for 20 to 30 years, within just a short few months, a number of them would start wandering the hallways in the middle of the day, wondering about who was around because they were lonely or didn't have things to do. Or in some cases, their wife had asked them to leave the house and to leave them alone. We also had phone calls routinely from individuals asking, could I come back as an employee or as a consultant? And both of us asked the question, geez, is that really what retirement is all about? Well, we began this quest to really try to learn from them, but also many others, again, about a decade ago. And after interviewing hundreds of successful retirees, as well as reading all the research, et cetera, and working with lots of different companies, we identified kind of 4 key challenges. And again, for some of you on the call, this may not be surprising, but I think it was. A couple of these statistics were, frankly, pretty startling to us. We've all talked in previous calls the fact that we're all going to live, hopefully, God willing, much longer. And so the first key challenge, obviously, is the implications that has on our pocketbook, particularly given the stock market and the weary economy that we live in. That's what a lot of people focus on is, will I have enough money for the next 30 to 40 years of my life? Obviously, another part of that challenge of living longer is health concerns, and that's certainly a very valid one and a high priority for Alan and I know many others on the call. A third challenge we've seen is being part of the sandwich generation. About 2/3 of us that have kids will in some form or fashion be supporting the boomerang generation as they come back home for some period of time. And about half of us on average will be supporting aging parents, which again I know is based on my own personal experience is not an easy task and has lots of different implications to us. The 2 trends, Dory, that were most surprising to us is what does it take to maintain a healthy relationship, particularly if you're married in retirement? We were startled to find out that the highest divorce rate in our country right now is couples over the age of 55. And again, we have seen this in our countless times in our workshops where less than 1 out of 4 couples, when you ask them the question in the workshop, how many of you have even talked retirement? Very few of them have even had the crucial conversations, which obviously you are very expert at. And then the last challenge that we saw was just the overall statistics of being able to make this transition into retirement. We were surprised to see the numbers that almost half of retirees don't enjoy their first year in retirement. We were very surprised, and we've seen a number of examples of this in our work in the last few months on 40% of people are depressed within 4 years of retirement. And through our interviews, we found out that the highest suicide rate in our country right now is men over the age of 70. We had always thought it was teens. And we have learned that a big part of this was because of men in particular not having clear purpose and connectedness and many of the other things we'll talk about later in the presentation. Again, these challenges are meant not to scare us about retirement. It's meant to just illustrate that this is a significant challenge and also our belief that you can have a phenomenal retirement if indeed you are aware of these challenges and as a result of it, pull together a holistic plan to deal with those.
That's very both sobering thoughts but really important thoughts of the challenges, and it seems to me you've hit on some key ones. You've mentioned some about the challenges as a good way to start. I also understand that you've identified a number of myths that many people have about retirement. Can you share what they are and why you consider them to be myths?
Dory, this is Alan, and like Keith, I'm really honored to be on the call with you and everybody else today. Thank you for the opportunity. As Keith mentioned, as we researched the subject of retirement, in some ways for our own use as well as for learning to be able to help others think about it, we interviewed hundreds of retirees. And almost to a person, we found that individuals were thinking about retirement in different ways than we were finding would be most helpful to them. And so we've broken down some of those misconceptions, if you will, into 5 myths that we share at our workshops and that are referred to in the book. So let me go through those very briefly, and then if anybody has any questions, we can get into some in more detail. The first myth that we identified, we call retirement is easy. Now, we believe, as I hope is coming across, that retirement can be a wonderful thing. Certainly the challenges that Keith identified are things that everybody has some risk of facing. But at the end of the day, we believe that everybody can and should live a fulfilling retirement. The issue is that many people think that retirement is, I'm retired, life of leisure, don't have to think about it much, and that causes some issues down the road. So we believe it's a myth that retirement is easy, and the way to manage the challenges that could confront us is to make sure that we have what Keith referred to as a holistic plan. In the same ways that we did planning at work, in our normal work lives, in the same way that we plan projects at home, in the same way we plan many of the things that we do, we believe it's critical to take the time and the energy and invest it in planning for the next 30, 40 years of our lives. And so it's not necessarily easy. It does take some effort. And we don't profess that we should spend our whole retirement planning for retirement, but it does take an investment of time and energy to make it work. So it is a myth that retirement is easy. It is not a myth that retirement is a wonderful thing. It just takes some planning. The second myth that we've identified is the one that we hear from a lot of people who are anticipating retirement, and we ask them, what kinds of things do you plan to do? And they say, I will figure it out later. And we have found that's a red flag for individuals who are likely to have some difficulties in retirement. We suggest that the sweet spot of planning for retirement is in a range of about 5 years before a person actually retires. As Dory, as you mentioned in my introduction, I've been retired for about 10 years, but I've been practicing retirement for about 15. And this concept of practicing retirement is one that we strongly recommend. The idea is that as we spend time planning for our retirement and identify those things we want to pursue, even before we're retirement, while we're still working in our primary career, we should bring those things back into our lives at the time and not wait until the actual retirement date. There are some good reasons for doing this. One is if we identify things we might want to do in retirement, but when we practice them, we find that these may not be the things that are of interest to us, we can always change our retirement plan before we actually retire. But for me, the most important reason for practicing retirement and beginning retirement planning early is if there are things that we are really passionate about and that we're looking forward to doing in retirement, why not do them now? Why not bring those things that light up our life back into our lives as soon as possible? Figuring retirement out later, again, is a red flag for potential issues, and the opportunity is not only to plan for retirement early, but also to practice retirement early. The third myth that we've identified is, I will figure it out myself. Keith referred to issues with couples, and certainly your expertise in your great book deals with this in much more depth. But we do find that, sadly, that many retirees get well into retirement before they have the, as Keith referred to, and what we call the crucial conversations about what it is that can bring couples together and avoid some of the pitfalls. Some of those pitfalls are not necessarily as drastic as the high divorce rate that Keith referred to, but even minor things that disrupt daily routines. We've had former colleagues and people that we've talked to in workshops that say that it took literally months for folks to figure out the daily routine of retirement. Who's going to pick up the mail? Who's going to go grocery shopping? Who's going to do this? Who's going to do that? Because for the first time in many years, couples are together conceivably 24/7. So we suggest strongly that, in fact, couples have the crucial conversations about retirement. We've identified 10 of them that, and we'll talk later on about a little bit more about the website, but you can find those crucial conversations on www.yourretirementquest.com. to get ahead of those issues and make sure that those people who are closest to you and will be affected by your retirement are part of your planning process. So that myth number 3 is, I will figure it out by myself, is in fact another red flag that we see. A fourth myth that we've identified is that retirement means not working. Certainly people retire from their primary careers, but there are all kinds of reasons that people identify that guide them to, in fact, do work in retirement. And work isn't necessarily working for pay. Some people take on significant volunteer efforts that take 2, 3, or maybe even sometimes 4 days a week that can be viewed as work, in quotes, if you will. But there are many reasons that people work in retirement. They may be following a passion that they've not been able to pursue for a long time because of working in their primary career. It's not uncommon to talk to somebody and say, I've been doing such and such for my whole career. I've always really wanted to teach. And they return to teaching in retirement because that's one of their passions. Some people do some work in retirement because of ensuring that they have financial security, adding a little bit more income to the retirement financial plan. So certainly retirement means leaving your primary career, but it doesn't necessarily mean not working. In fact, as we've identified, as Keith identified some of the statistics that we found, we also found that the segment of society that is the highest percentage of entrepreneurs and starting up new ventures are those over the age of 55. And nearly 40% of those who are self-employed became that way over the age of 50. So working in retirement is certainly not something to be concerned about. There are many reasons to do it, and it is a myth that retirement means not working. The final myth will not really surprise anybody, I think, but the myth is that money equals happiness. We talk about, and we'll talk in a little bit later about the concept of financial security and where that fits in a retirement plan. And financial security is important, but all of the research and all of our interviews indicate that while it is important, the size of the nest egg is not necessarily what drives happiness in retirement. In fact, the working title of our book before we published it was Best Things in Retirement Are Free. And we chose to change that name when we found that some people were thinking that the book was going to be about how to find cheap hotel rooms in Florida. We changed the title of the book, but the concept still applies, and that is that much of what we can do and should be doing in retirement for that retirement to be fulfilling is, in fact, things that are not necessarily costly to do. And again, all of the research says that the size of the nest egg is not what is the primary relationship or correlation to happiness. In fact, the data show that only 10% of happiness comes from materialistic factors. So those are the 5 myths. Retirement is easy. I will figure it out later. I will figure it out myself. Retirement means not working, and money equals happiness.
Great. We do actually have now a number of questions. Even though I know that there's still another section of you're going to speak to, I thought maybe I would ask, just bring in a couple of them at least for right now. From Susan in New York, the question is, have you changed or updated your description of retirement as the times have been changing? And do you see it as an event, phase, or what do you use as the framework for the future? I think you've been speaking a little to it in terms of these myths, but I wondered if you might want to elaborate a little bit.
Dora, this is Keith. Since I'm from Albany, New York, let me take the questions. Hi, Susan from New York.
Okay.
We don't particularly like the word retirement because it has a lot of negative baggage and connotations. I many times introduce myself as having graduated from my last part of life and I moved on to the next stage. I know Chris talked about pre-retirement, and there are lots of different connotations out there. We basically talk about reinventing yourself, moving on to the next stage of life, identifying what's next, whatever works for you. I agree with, I think, Susan's hypothesis. It's a dated term, but we have not figured out the ideal right term that works for everyone yet.
The other thing I would throw in, this is Alan, the other thing I would throw in, Sue, is that we have a model that we're not going to get a chance to talk about in great deal today that includes there being 5 stages of retirement. And so retirement means different things to different people as they go through those stages. And we have learned as we've continued to investigate this whole area that knowing where you are along that journey of the 5 stages and constantly renewing your plan as you go through the retirement journey will change each individual's perspective about what retirement means to them. And that's one of the things we emphasize, by the way. We're going to be talking a little bit more about planning in a moment, but one of the things that we emphasize is that retirement is like fingerprints. Everybody's is different. Our circumstances are different, and there's really not a prescription for exactly what it is. So it's perhaps less about what we have found different as we've gone on our journey and more about what each individual will find as they go on theirs.
Great, thank you. Let me ask one other question now, and then I'm going to have you continue, and then we'll integrate some of the other questions. And this one you may be talking about next, I'm not sure, but Mary, who's from Newburgh, wonders, she says that her retirement date starts 9/30, and her husband was planning to continue working, but now his company has offered a retirement incentive. Her question is, what's your sense? Is it a good idea for people to retire at the same time? Is it better to stagger retirement? What's been your experience with that?
Let me jump in here, Keith, and then you can add to it. Early on, we had found some information that talked about it being inadvisable for couples, partners to retire at the same time. I think that the concept that would make be of most use to you would be, think about retirement and retirement planning as 3 different plans. What is your plan? What is your partner's plan? And then what is your mutual plan? One of the things that most couples find is that when they retire, they tend to think about, oh my goodness, this is great. We're going to be able to be together 24/7. And it doesn't take too long to realize that's great for a while, but it's important that each individual follow their individual passions and pursuits, and then that the partners also have a mutual plan that does include the things that they want to do together. So I think that retiring at the same time is fine as long as you've thought about what's my plan, what's his or her plan, and what's our plan together. Does that make sense to you, Keith?
Yeah, again, given most couples don't do that, Alan, I think it's risky both retiring at the same time. Again, unless you've got those 3 plans nailed down and they're in alignment, I would suggest staggering retirement to allow one person to make the transition, get their feet on the ground before the other person does that sequentially. Dory?
Oh, very helpful to think about, and much of there is a lot of debate about that. And I remember way back there was actually some statistics about people being happier if they retired at the same time. But I think the longer people have been retired, that's when, just as you're saying, sometimes it breaks down a little because the honeymoon stage is just the beginning, and then they go, gosh, what's next? But great. So let me just ask, and then we'll come back to some of the other questions. And I just want to encourage people to please keep submitting questions. But I know that the subtitle of your book and part of your model says there are 10 key elements of fulfilling retirement. Can you explain both your model, I know you mentioned it just a little bit, and also talk about what these key elements are?
Sure, we'd be glad to. I understand that Dory has sent out to all of you who are participating a document that we shared with her that is called a key element assessment, and I understand it's also available to you if you're online. You can click on, I think it's called Take the Assessment. For those of you who don't have it, that's okay. We're going to walk you through it in piece by piece. But you could also, again, visit our website at yourretirementquest.com, and you're going to find a pyramid model both at the bottom of the key element assessment document and on our website. And what it basically shows is that a fulfilling retirement is supported by some foundation blocks and some pillars that make up these 10 key elements. And so what we'd like to do in the remaining time that we have here is walk you through what we've learned about what the key elements are for a fulfilling retirement, but also ask you to fill out this assessment as we go, a candid assessment of where you are, whether we don't know obviously what all the ages are of the folks on the call, but regardless of whether you're nearing retirement or even thinking about it, to fill this out as a candid assessment of where you are in your life today as a way of getting more engaged with what these key elements are. And then also perhaps you can think about others that you know that may be either approaching retirement or in retirement, and think about what their ratings might be for each of these key elements. So what we're going to do in the next bit of time here is to share each of the key elements with you, and then to ask you to fill out this key element assessment. And for those of you who don't have it in front of you, we will read the assessment statement and ask you to rate it on for yourself. 1 is a low rating and 5 is a high rating. And it's just a way, again, of getting you engaged as to how to think about these key elements. So I'm going to start, and then we're going to go back and forth on what the key elements are and let you know what the assessment statements are. The first key element that we identified is the importance of actually having a plan. And if you haven't noticed from previous parts of the call here, is we think this is an important piece. As we read the many books that are available on retirement, and some of them are very good, one of the things that we found missing was that it wasn't necessarily a way to, once people got the knowledge from the book, there wasn't necessarily a practical way in order to get from that newfound knowledge to, okay, what do I do with it? So one of the things that we put in our book was a practical planning approach that helped people think about, okay, now that I know, here's some things I need to think about. What do I actually do next, and how do I approach it? And one of the things that we also found in our research was that having a plan significantly increases the likelihood of having a fulfilling retirement. And I'm not just talking financial plan now, I'm talking life plan. We'll get to financial security in a moment. The other piece about a plan that we have found important is that the plan should be written. Many people say, I've got the plan, I know what I want to do, it's in my head. But the research shows that any plan is 5 times more likely to be successfully implemented if it is written down. So our key element, our first key element is having a retirement plan and having it written down. And so what we'd like you to do is to assess yourself relative to that, or again, somebody who may be in this situation. And the assessment statement is, I have a plan for my retirement. It is written down and up to date. So for yourself, or for, again, somebody you may be thinking about, rate that low 1 to high of 5, somewhere in that 1 to 5 range. And then we'll move on to the next key element. Keith, you want to pick it up?
Absolutely. And Dory, by the way, you're going to share with us your scores at the end, right?
I didn't say that, but maybe.
Only kidding, of course. We were expecting you to get all 5.
I have to admit, we don't have it totally written down. We have aspects of it written down, but not totally. I'm not way up there on that. I'm in the middle.
Yeah, and as Alan said, and we find nine times out of 10, most people don't have it written down. It clearly is not a holistic plan. If they have anything, it might be a financial plan, but they don't have all aspects of retirement, which is what we'll be talking about here. The second key element that is critical is what we call purpose and values, and it gets back to some of the statistics we saw, but the specific assessment statement to consider is, I am clear on my life purpose and core values. So again, if you were in one of our workshops, we would be asking you to share your written life purpose. And again, this is beyond, I do this job at IBM, or I'm a mother of 5 kids. Those are roles. Those are not life purposes. And also core values, because we find a lot of people that their life is based on their role, and when the role changes, or they retire or are separated or their kids go away to school or whatever, they're lost. Score yourself on having a written, clear life purpose and score values on a scale of 1 to 5.
The next key element is attitude. We were surprised to find that the research shows that people that are viewed as having a positive attitude actually live on average 8 more years than those who have negative attitudes. And that's why we've made it a key element. This is especially important as people age and how they view what's their attitude toward the aging process as they continue on their retirement journey. Keith likes to think about this as, and people tend to relate to it, is are you a Tigger or an Eeyore? For those of you who remember the Winnie the Pooh stories, and most do, are you a Tigger or an Eeyore? Rate the assessment statement for attitude of those closest to me describe me as having a positive attitude. Rate that from 1 to 5.
Yeah, and again, this is not meant to be an assessment of do you think you're a Tigger. It's how would other people describe you as either a Tigger or Eeyore. My guess is, Dory, you would score very high on this one as being a Tigger.
Yeah, I have myself up there. That's true.
Great.
That's where people put me.
Absolutely. The fourth key element is what we call well-being. And again, typically people talk about this as far as being physically healthy. We have a bit of a broader definition and encompasses what we call having energy, sufficient energy to fully do what we want to do in life in retirement. And energy is 4 dimensions, and again, explained much further in our book around physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual energy. All 4 of those driving our ability to be able to have the energy to do what we want to do in retirement. So the specific assessment statement here is I have sufficient energy to fully do what I want to do in my life, and importantly, based on everything I know, I'll be able to sustain this well into my retirement. And there's lots of habits I think we all know on the call we can be doing to facilitate having great well-being and energy in retirement. So how would you score yourself on a scale of 1 to 5 there?
So the 5th key element that we wanted to share with you today is financial security. As we mentioned earlier, the myth is that happiness, money equals happiness, and certainly that is a myth, but it is not a myth that it's important to pay attention to our financial security. And as I mentioned earlier, financial security is not about the size of our nest egg. As I mentioned to you, we had interviewed hundreds of retirees, many whose profiles you will find in the book. Some of those folks are happy and fulfilled in retirement and are living on very small nest eggs, including just on Social Security. And there are many examples of people with what I think any of us would consider very large nest eggs who are not fulfilled in retirement. But what's important about financial security is that you've achieved a sense of not really worrying significantly about your finances in retirement. Excuse me. And the other thing that I would throw in here before we do the assessment statement is that we have come to believe, based on our interviews and our workshops, that most people would benefit from considering a financial advisor and having somebody who has that unbiased third-party assessment and being able to help with financial planning. The financial security assessment statement is that you should rate from 1 to 5 for you is I have a financial plan that will enable me to securely live the life that I want now and in the future. Financial security.
Again, we appreciate everybody's patience here. We're halfway through the quiz. The next one is what we call connectedness. And this is not about having 500 people on Facebook. While that's a nice thing, we're talking about here connectedness with others at a much deeper level, to the point where our assessment question is, I am missed by others when I don't show up, and I have others who I can lean upon. And again, one of the things we were surprised to see in our research is that the average person in the United States has, according to the Gallup organization, 1.5 friends. And if you can just see the importance of connectedness in retirement by walking into any McDonald's in the morning, and I'm sure you would all see a group of elderly gentlemen sitting there with one another, connecting with each other as part of the beginning of their day. Those that don't have this are at great risk of not having a great retirement. So score yourself. Again, I'm missed by others when I don't show up, and I have others who I can truly lean upon.
I would just add to Keith's statistic of the 1.5 friends on average for each person in America that a decade ago that number was 3. And so it may be that the 500 Facebook friends are getting us away from the true meaning of friendship and the connectedness that not only improves our quality of life, but has been measured to also improve longevity. Mm-hmm. The next key element is giving back. Some people think about this as volunteering. Some people think about this as financial support for the causes that are important to you. One of the things that we were surprised to find is that when baby boomers are asked before retirement whether or not they're going to volunteer, 2/3 say, absolutely, I'm going to do that. However, as it turns out, once people do retire, less than 1/3, in fact, do volunteer, and surprisingly, only 4%, actually less than 4%, spend more than 9 hours a week in volunteering. This is offset by the statistic that the average number of hours that a retiree watches television each week is 43. Think about what it would be if we took many of those 43 hours and applied it to giving back. And why is giving back important? Not only does it make a difference in our communities, but all the research shows that the person who gives back gets actually more out of the exercise than the person to whom they are giving back. It's a key part and a key element of a fulfilling retirement. The assessment statement is, I am engaged in activities that make a meaningful difference to others. Again, assess that from 1 to 5.
Again, the next one is called passions, and this may be different than the definition that you might use for passions, but these are the things that we absolutely get excited about and jump out of bed in the morning looking forward to do. And we find that over time, and Dori, you mentioned it a little bit, but people get into a rut in retirement. They watch lots of TV, they increasingly are isolated at home, etc. And at least in our mind, they might be enjoying that, but is that really the best use of their remaining years in life? So we are huge believers in people having a bucket list, which is their dreams and passions that they want to pursue while they're alive and healthy and able to do them. Again, how many of you would say, according to the assessment statement here, I jump out of bed in the morning, truly excited about my day, being driven by the passions that I want to pursue? Hopefully, most of you have a pretty high score there.
The next key element is growth. And one of the things that we found when we interviewed people who had retired is that they've said, what I haven't found is how to replace the intellectual stimulation that I get at work. And this got us on a path of learning more about what it takes to keep ourselves mentally alert, mentally growing in our lives. And we added it as a key element of a fulfilling retirement. So the assessment statement is, my week is filled with new and challenging activities. New and challenging activities. Rate that.
And then the last key element here is what we call fun. And again, it's related to passion, certainly can be connected to growth, but these are the many activities in our life that are just plain fun to do. And again, this may be just for those of us that have been part of the corporate world, but that can defund you over time. Ask some of our spouses as they talk about us over time. And these are just the activities that, again, we may have rediscovered in our life. We ask people the question in our seminars, what did you love to do when you were 10 years old? And revisit those fun things and dreams and ask the question, why aren't you pursuing those? With our belief that if you're doing that in retirement, you're probably using the time you best possibly can. Again, score yourself on a scale of 1 to 5. I have many activities in my life that are just plain fun to do. Again, so you may be wondering, that's great, I got my scores here, now what do I do? Again, I know Dori will probably open it up for some questions, but in our seminars, what this is the basis for beginning the development of the holistic life plan. Ideally, we ask people to start thinking about their scores in each of these areas. Where they've scored high, what are activities they can continue to do to continue to play to their strengths in these areas? But also importantly, in the areas that scored the lowest, what are some activities they might want to start doing to bring their overall scores up? Our belief is all 10 of these are important. So your retirement is only going to be as strong as some of the lowest scored numbers that you might have had. Let me ask you, Dory, again, not to reveal your scores, but any interesting insights for you as you've taken this?
I think for me, the writing it down is key, but I do have pretty high scores. The thing that hit me is that it's all fine and good for now, and it's part of the predicament that we all have of the unknowns of what's going to happen down the road in terms of health and energy and whatever. The hope is to control the parts that we can control. And so what I get out of this is it's a good, for me, a good starting place of knowing I'm in good shape with many of these elements. I just probably have to write more of them down a little bit, although my husband and I have done a lot of talking about it. When I co-wrote my book, he was part of the process of talking so that we also had individual visions and shared visions. But I really think that this is a great assessment and a tool to really evaluate where am I now, where do I want to be. And I loved what you said before of what can I build in now, particularly if you're not yet retired, so that you have a more opportunity to live the kind of life you want, even though you have to be open for the curveballs that are going to come along the way.
Dory, the point you make is a good one. You talk about curveballs, and we refer to that as renewal. We advise folks that once they have a plan, we know that one thing that's going to be absolutely predictable in retirement is that things are going to change. And by the way, that doesn't necessarily mean just change for the worse. When Ann and I had grandkids, that was a great positive change, but it significantly changed our retirement plan. We were living in Cincinnati, and our grandkids were in St. Louis, and over time we decided to move to St. Louis to be part of our closer part of their lives. So it's not just the bad things that happen over time, it's also the good things, and having a plan allows you to take those new circumstances into effect and, in fact, renew your plan to take that next step. So we're into constant renewal of the plan.
That's excellent. Let me just share some of these questions dovetail with some of what you've said, but I want to honor that people have been asking questions, and do want to just say that Mary, the person that asked the question about the timing of retirement, did comment that she really appreciated your comment about the 3 plans, mine, yours, ours, and that was very helpful. There was another question in a similar vein, just saying that since you were saying it's not so good for people to retire at the same time, do you have a sense of what kind of time differences seem to be most optimal? Does it have to do with the retirement dates, or does it have to do more with this planning?
One thing that might be worth sharing at this point is that we've identified 4 questions that, when asked and all answered yes, that's when it's the right time to retire. And those 4 questions are, do I have enough? Will I have enough to do? Have I had enough? And does my partner want me home 24/7? I think, and we spend a lot more time talking about each of those questions in the book, so it's going to be difficult to get into much more detail here. But I think the right time to retire for any individual is to answer those 4 questions. When it's yes, then it's time to retire. And if you combine that with the work that you've done, Dory, about the importance of conversations, that couples conversations and what we call crucial conversations, put those 2 together, and I think the answer will fall out of that assessment.
I think you're right. And I just want to take 1 minute, too, to just mention, since you've mentioned the book, that I really do recommend the book that Roberta Taylor and I co-authored called The Couples Retirement Puzzle, 10 Must-Have Conversations for Transitioning to the Second Half of Life. There's much overlap, and Keith and Alan and I have looked and talked about that, and I think both are very helpful in helping you just think about this, what's next in life. Let me ask a couple of other questions. This one has to do a little bit more with the financial, from Nancy, who's from Florham Park. And she says, many baby boomers are not financially prepared for retirement but don't really have a choice. Do you see any creative alternatives on the horizon? Alternative housing options, ways to lower cost of living, or things like that?
First of all, yes, the bulk of baby boomers, sadly, are not prepared financially for retirement. Again, as Alan said, though, we interviewed people that were at $10 million in their bank accounts and they were miserable. and others that were surviving on Social Security and having a fulfilling retirement. But having said that, I think there are lots of creative options. It's amazing to us to see what people do in their second careers. Many times it ends up being a hobby or a purpose, passion. For example, my wife, when she retired after 34 years of teaching, wanted to volunteer a lot, and she was so great on staff, they asked her to join full-time in a paying job. That wasn't the plan, but that ended up being a benefit for her. There's also a lot of great resources out there. I think there's a website called frugalretirement.com that gives all kinds of great insights on an ongoing basis on how you can reduce your costs in retirement and, in fact, live on much lower than what you're probably used to living, et cetera. Yes, Dory, I think financials are a challenge. I think Alan said it. Finding a good financial advisor, I think Chris talked about it in your other group call. The financial industry leaves a lot to be desired. Finding someone you feel truly comfortable with that can really give you a good, holistic, unbiased plan is probably step one. And then looking for opportunities to reduce spending and also earn some additional income in areas you might not anticipate would be the second step.
Both great suggestions that I totally agree with and support. Here's a question from Gary, who's from New York. He asks, what are the major challenges of the 40% of retirees who are depressed? What do you find, if you have this information, are the major challenges of the couples who divorce late in life? And what are the best ways to practice retirement?
Wow, that's
okay. You got a couple of hours?
Let me tackle the first one, Alex. And on the depression side, again, I think the two core root causes are lack of clarity of purpose and lack of connectedness. Those are two drivers of happiness in retirement, and again, driven by not having a holistic written plan, et cetera. But we find many individuals, particularly men, once they leave work, they're lost and they're lonely. And that, to a great extent, contributes to the depression rate, particularly among that group.
Great.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Do you want to tackle another one?
Yeah, I was just going to say the issue with the divorce rate, as we've talked to folks, one of the things that we've learned, and Dora, you're probably the best person to answer this, but one of the things we've learned is that couples find out after retirement that they had some fundamental relationship issues before retirement, but were able to, I don't know if avoid is the right word, but avoid them because each day they went off to work. And then pretty soon, now they're home 24/7, and the relationship issues become magnified. So we urge, that's one of the key crucial conversations to have early on, is where are we in our relationship and what kinds of things do we need to be talking about before we retire so that we've got some time to work those out. And Dory, again, you're probably the expert on this instead of us.
No, I agree with you that I think for couples that have had children, sometimes that's been the glue, but oftentimes people do end up discovering that there's no longer the glue, and that when the structure of outside work is gone, that it creates strains. I think many couples can end up working and creating a very healthy and good life together. Not everybody is inclined to want to put the energy to do that, and I think that's part of the higher divorce rate. And I think also what I find is that more women now are in the workforce, and with people earning more money and people living longer, there are more people that say, you know what, if I'm going to have another 30 years, I don't really know that I want to stay in a relationship that isn't very satisfying. I think the impetus of the divorce comes from many different directions, but I think many marriages can, with taking the time to really talk and work and clarify, many can also refurbish your relationship in a way.
Well, the other part of that question had to do...
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the other part of that question had to do with practicing retirement. Let me just say one more word on that and to try and respond, and that is, as we present the concept of people, the first reaction sometimes is, wait a second, how can I practice retirement? I'm working. And then as we talk about it more, folks go, oh, yeah, I can do that. So here's some examples. We've talked to people who said, in retirement, I want to become a bridge master. And we said, okay, do you have one more night a month that you can add playing bridge? Well, yeah, I have that. Good. That's practicing retirement. It's bringing that passion into your life. My example is that I knew I wanted to play baseball in retirement, and I knew that there were tournaments around the country that I could play in, but I didn't have the time to travel around and play baseball tournaments. So I joined a local league that played on Sunday afternoons. So I played a game a week while I was working, and then when I retired, I was able to not only continue in that league, but also travel around and play in tournaments. Most people can, in fact, bring some part of the retirement passion into their lives today in practicing. And Dory, if I might, I know we're getting short on time here. If I might, there's some things that Keith and I wanted to suggest to people that they might do as follow-up to get a more deep understanding of some of the concepts we've talked about. Certainly one of the things is that take the assessment that you've done and think about in your own life. Do you want to turn that into a life plan? Or is there somebody in the retirement stage of their life that you can help them think about it in that regard? Secondly, obviously, we'd love for you to read Your Retirement Quest, because each of the concepts we talked are dealt with in much more detail there. You can get a sense for much of it if you visit our website at yourretirementquest.com. And we'd also ask you to join what we call the retirement conversation. We have a Facebook group called Your Retirement Quest, where we share a lot of information and have discussions about retirement. And then we also have access to a more advanced assessment. And Keith, you want to spend just a minute explaining that?
Yeah, Alan, that is through the retirement options, which I know some people on the call are familiar with. If you want to do a more holistic, detailed assessment of your retirement preparedness, just give us a shout.
Great.
Those were the kind of the to-do items we would suggest.
That's great. Those are important takeaways for people. We do have a few other questions, and we're just about out of time. I know one person wanted you to Mary from California wanted you to just quickly repeat those 4 questions of readiness for retirement. Can you just say that quickly, maybe?
Do you have enough? Will you have enough to do? Have you had enough? And does your partner want you home 24/7?
One other question, which you may or may not be able to answer right now, but it's from Heather, who's a physician who's in Canada, and she really was wondering how you help people both in the kind of pre-retirement and retirement to really deal with their health and well-being. Are there ways to help people with that? Is that part of the practicing?
Clearly, Dory, if that's an area that people score low on, we have an additional class that we do with lots of companies, GE, Staples, Procter Gamble, in other words, that's called Corporate Athlete. And it really is all about the habits of teaching people on how to sustain their personal energy, again, in the 4 dimensions we talked about. Again, if people score low on that area, we'd be glad to chat with them further, but there are very simple things we all can be doing every day to not only have more energy today, but hopefully 30 years from now, too.
Wonderful. I just want to thank you so much. I think this was a very excellent and powerful discussion. And I know Sarah also had a question, Sarah from Atlanta, of how does one find people who specialize in retirement counseling or coaching? And I think you've met 2 people right here, Keith Lawrence and Alan. I do. There's an organization called the Life Planning Network. If you were to look up Life Planning Network, and there are people in different locations, if people like face-to-face work, although a lot of coaches do work on the telephone. So there really are a lot of resources around so that it's important for people not to feel alone. And part of what I hope with this series is to bring experts to people so that you have a chance to see what's available around the world, basically, because there's an awful lot happening now since there's so many boomers. Any last takeaways that you want to mention, Alan and Keith, just for a final? I mean, I think you did it.
Other than we have a contact page on our website, so if you have questions that you want to send us, that would be great.
I want to thank all of you who joined us today for the call. I want to thank you again for being here, and thank you to Alan Spector and Keith Lawrence for a terrific presentation. Take care.
Thank you, Dory.
Thanks, Dory.
You've been listening to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio with Dr. Dorian Mintzer. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show, listen to past episodes, or download our free retirement transition guide, visit revolutionizeyourretirementradio.com.